Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Dinucci. I'm Vice President of North America for ChargePoint. We're based in Silicon Valley, and I want to thank you for choosing to spend this masterclass here in this room with me, and I hope I make it worth your while and reward that faith. Quick show of hands, who in the room, if you've ever made your living as a sales rep or an account executive of any kind, can I see any hands that have done that or are currently doing that? So a few. So I'm going to go through some things. I'd like to take you on a little bit of a journey here. Essentially what I'm going to tell you about and take you through is a little bit about my company, what we do, and what's been successful for us, and then the tactics and techniques that I used to build that team over the last 5 years, and then talk a little bit about sort of the market that we're in, and then how that compares to other markets, and along the way take you through some very basic selling. I know I kind of did this out of order. Yesterday I did a 2020 session on negotiation and closing. That probably should have come second. Now I'm starting with sort of selling basics and how to assemble a sales team, because I feel like in all of the wonderful work that you folks do in entrepreneurship and selling a business plan to a VC and networking and all the terrific things that go on here, one of the things that maybe is not taught as much is just the idea of reaching the customer, selling, how to get your product out there across and connect with people. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So a little bit about ChargePoint. ChargePoint was founded in 2007. We make EV charging systems for the Tesla, the BMW Mini, the Leaf, the Volt, all those types of cars that plug in. You can see right there on the far right side of the screen a picture of one of our current charging stations, and then charging the BMW i3 at the bottom using one of our custom colored blue stations, and then obviously the Tesla S at the top. Our company, again, was founded in 2007. We're based in Silicon Valley. I was their first hired account rep in 2008. And at the time, I think as I said yesterday, there weren't very many accounts to rep. But they brought me in as the Vice President of Strategic Accounts, which essentially meant that I carried a bag and I went out and I called on customers. And over the last 5 years, we've seen that grow into a massive business, and I'll show you some examples of that. This is just sort of a trophy case of some of our customers. I'd really like to focus mostly in the bottom right corner. You've got workplace charging of people that plug their car in while they're working, or retailers, which is in the right above that, where you shop, dine, go to movies and whatnot. Google and Apple between them have almost 1,000 charging stations in the Bay Area. I sold every single one of those stations, so my kids' college fund thanks them very much for that. And I'll show you a couple of pictures here. This is a row of ChargePoint charging stations at Google with my champion there plugging in one of their fleet vehicles in Google and Mountain View. Here's Facebook in Menlo Park, their headquarters, a row of our charging stations there. And then Pixar, one of the coolest campuses I've ever been to in my life. They're based in Emeryville. You all know Pixar, toys, Toy Story, Cars, those types of movies. They have a wonderful campus in Emeryville, California, which is right down the road from Berkeley. This is their main studio gate, along with their courtyard. You can see the scale of that bouncing ball and the lamp that's in the, it was their first student project, their first short film that they made. It was called Luxo Jr. They have a giant sculpture of those, and you can see for scale the tiny little man next to it. It's probably about 35 feet high, all made of steel. They have a wonderful trophy case in their lobby. Never seen an Academy Award this close before. This was their Best Animated Feature for Finding Nemo Award, I think in 2003. They have that right there. You can see in the top right corner the little life-size little green men that are from Toy Story. And they've got some life-size creatures in the lobby as well. So they put in a bunch of charging stations as well. And then finally, I want to just take you through just a quick example of what we saw at Target. For any of you who are not Americans, Target's a large retailer, very similar to Tesco's or Habitat. And they put in charging stations as a pilot. They wanted to find out, they wanted to look and see, of their 1,800 stores, $68 billion of revenue, you can see where their stores are mostly populated. and we wanted to try and find a correlation between the Target stores and where EV drivers are actually showing up. So Target said, we're going to put in some charging stations and see if it affects the behavior of the shoppers while they're in the store. Now Target, it's pretty clear, they want people to stay, any retailer, I don't care if it's Marks and Spencer, I don't care if it's Harrods, I don't care if it's Target or Walmart. Their goal is they want to keep you in the store longer. The longer you stay, hopefully the more money you spend. The average customer inside of a Target spends $1 a minute, and that is a direct relationship. It continues to go up. If they stay for 60 minutes, they tend to spend 60 bucks. If you can get them to stay for 90 minutes, they should spend about $90. Now, is it possible that you could go in the store for 3 minutes and buy a big screen TV? Yes, you could also spend 2 hours in the store and buy a package of tissue. But chances are, the longer you spend, they call this dwell time. Now, throw it out to, and people in the room that already know the answer, zip it, don't answer this question. What would you say is the average length of a customer shopping trip? They asked me this when I was at Target headquarters last year in Minnesota. Way off, my guess was horrendous. Throw out a number, minutes. 40 minutes, who says lower? 20, anybody think? I said 90 minutes, pretty bad, right? But my feeling was, when I'm there with my kids, I'm not getting out of there for under an hour. And I'm not spending $1 a minute either, because they want to see the Pixar minute movies, they want to see the video games and the toys and all that. The correct answer is actually 22 minutes. So whoever said 20 minutes, very good guess. 22 minutes is the average length of time that you spend in a Target store. And they said that their goal, their objective for this EV charging pilot was to increase that dwell time by 50%, get them to stay an extra 11 minutes to 33 minutes. After leaving these charging stations installed for almost a year and seeing thousands of sessions, they found that the average dwell time of an EV driver at a Target store that had a charging station was not 22 minutes, it wasn't 33 minutes, it went up to 75 minutes. So Target was intrigued and said, how can we get as many of these installed as quickly? And by the way, the demographics of an EV driver, are they attractive? Average age 45 years old, 2 kids, upper graduate degree, $150,000 to $175,000 a year. I mean, is this somebody you want in your store? You may not want to party with them, but you want them shopping in your store, right? Okay, so that's a little bit about sort of what my company does, and now I want to take you through very briefly a couple just basics on selling. Anybody who's done this before or has been selling, none of this is going to be new to you. I like this cartoon. Sarah, have sales do that thing where profits go up. So here are the basics of selling, and then I'm going to go through an 8-point plan of how to hire a startup sales team if you're founding a company, and when the right time to do that is. I said this yesterday, I think it bears repeating. The most important quality you have to be successful in selling, negotiating, closing, or doing any kind of business, in my opinion, and I'm up here, you're sitting there, so my opinion counts today, is empathy. Not aggressiveness. Not questioning techniques, not stick-to-itiveness. It's empathy. If you're likable, if people can connect to you, if they relate to you in any real or personal way, then your chances of succeeding go way up. They don't guarantee success. Make sure you understand what I'm saying to you. It doesn't guarantee success. If you're empathetic, you might also be dull as dirt, and you might not be able to actually close the business or ask for the sale. But if you have empathy, it's a good start. You need to listen much more than you speak. And when I say listen, I'm going to populate this out a little bit here. You can't do the show up and throw up, right? I tell all of my reps, you can't sell them anything until you know what their needs are, which means that the entire first meeting, or at least the first half of the first meeting, should only be about asking questions. Even if it's, what did you have for breakfast this morning and how did you like it? If you can get them to share something with you, you're getting somewhere with them, okay? But as this joke, this little cartoon here says, you know, nice to meet you, tell me your name. I have just what you need. But normally, it takes some time, but as this next cartoon shows, sometimes you don't have the time to do it. Sometimes they don't, hey, you're my favorite rep, you got 2 minutes, okay? So my sort of 4-point plan here on sales basics is you need to match your solution with what their need is. You can't sell them anything or offer a solution until you know exactly what's bothering them. I always like to start by saying, what is your biggest problem that you'd like to solve? I don't care what it has to do with. What keeps you up at night? A year from now, what 3 things do you need to have solved? And see if anything that you can do for them, even if it's consulting, can help solve that problem. And if the answer to that is no and you need to walk away, that's fine. But see if you can connect them with somebody else. That's a lot about what SBS is about. It's a lot about what SVCO is about, is finding those linkages. Connect people. Your net worth is equal to your net work, right? That's what Reid Hoffman said. And you need to ask open-ended questions, okay? Open-ended questions are ones that you cannot answer yes or no to. You have to say, how would that work? Or tell me more about, and then put in the question that you want to ask. If you say, do you like your current IT vendor? They can just say, yes. Your better question would be, tell me about your current IT infrastructure or your IT ecosystem. What do you like about it? What could it be? How could you improve it, or what would you like to change about it? Okay? And then finally, I think this is really important, never burn a bridge. I'm going to tell you, I told 3 sales horror stories yesterday in my negotiation class. I'm not going to go over those. Fortunately for you, unfortunately for me, I have a plethora of sales horror stories of things that went horribly wrong and crashed and burned personally to me. And I wasn't going to put this in, but my love, Kelly, who's in the back here, right between my beloved brother and my dad, both here, and I'm thrilled to be here with all of them. She reminded me of this story, and I want to share it with you here real quickly. This anecdote actually takes place about a year ago when I was at ChargePoint as VP in North America, and we wanted to try and sell them about 80 charging stations at their campus on Tasman Road in San Jose. They have a lot of EV drivers and a lot of employees, and I went as hard as I could to try and win this business. It represented a lot of money for ChargePoint. A big deal for us is a PO that has 2 commas in it, $1 million. That's a big deal for us. We're about a $25 million company right now. I did everything that I could, short of naming one of my children after this guy. And I even offered that, but he said no. And in the end, he went with another vendor. He went with one of our competitors. And I was pissed. I had put a lot of time, and I really felt like this isn't the way it was supposed to end. I've seen this movie. I know how this romantic comedy goes. We're supposed to walk down the street in the rain holding hands now, me and Jim. But he's not. He's walking away with somebody else. And I was standing there in the rain crying. And it felt bad to me, and I wanted to unload on him. But here's what I did instead, and this goes to never burning a bridge. What I said to him was, actually his name is Ollie. I said Jim because I was looking at Jim Hall at that moment. I said to Ollie, who was the guy making the decision, Ollie, it's okay that you made a bad decision. You made a mistake. You don't know that yet. This is going to be very painful for you. Over the next year, as you try and implement this nightmare of a solution that you got tricked into, you will look for ways out of this. I want you to know I will always be your friend, and I'm going to be your soft landing. Lord knows I'm cushiony enough. I will act as your soft landing. When you need to undo this, I will be here. And I promise you, I will never say, I told you so, or you fouled up, or anything like that. So it's okay that you made a mistake. And he said, Mike, I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong. Last month, right before Halloween, he gave me a $1.2 million order for 118 charging stations to rip out what we call an R&R, rip and replace, to rip and replace every single one of the Blink stations that they bought that he said were an absolute nightmare. Now, he never said to me, Mike, you were right. I made a mistake. But the PO was enough, right? The order was enough to make me feel like by being patient and knowing that no is sometimes a long way to yes, I felt great when that order finally turned around. Now, I want to walk you through real quickly what I think are the 8 points that you need To build a startup sales team, this is how I did it at my company. I don't know if it'll work for you. Take what you think that's important here and apply it to your company or your idea or your group, okay? The first one is, don't hire salespeople too early. They shouldn't be among the first 5 or 10 people that you hire. In other words, the founders should be able to sell, and the first thing that you're selling is your business plan to a VC. So you need to be able to ask those open-ended questions. If you didn't see my negotiation workshop or closing workshop yesterday, I hope that they'll put that online, and you're welcome to certainly download that, because a lot of what will probably help you. And by the way, I saw some of the titles of the other phenomenal master classes here. There's plenty of people far more qualified than I to tell you how to get a VC to buy your business plan. But a lot of the tactics, I think, in terms of negotiation and closing are universal no matter what you're trying to sell, whether you're trying to get an interview, whether you're trying to sell a product to a customer, whether you're trying to sell a business plan to a VC and raise capital. But your founder, if you are a founder, your first job is actually to be a salesperson in the company. Secondly, you don't need salespeople. Remember, you need sales. Okay, don't think of hiring a VP of sales. Think of a revenue engineer. You would not hire a development manager as one of your first 3 or 5 employees. So why would you ever hire a sales manager? What you need are bag-carrying sales professionals, guys and gals who are killers, that are empathetic, can connect with a customer, can be patient, don't burn bridges, ask great questions, and probe for need with customers. That's what you need. And don't get caught up with fancy titles. I do that, but don't. Do what I say, not what I do. Don't get caught up with fancy titles. Just get people in the door. Like I said, when I started at ChargePoint, I was a bag-carrying rep, but I asked them to give me a title because it didn't cost them anything to do it. So I said, make me VP of Strategic Accounts. And in time, I'll grow into that role. I will earn it, I promise you. And I did, and now I'm VP of North America. So that feels good. Third, hiring salespeople is like buying melons, not grapes. One at a time, very carefully, slowly. When you buy melons, you need to pick them up, you need to squeeze them a little bit. I'm not saying you should squeeze your employees, but some people do. It's happened in the Valley. Hire people carefully, slowly, and one at a time. You cannot hire salespeople in batches. I've never been an engineering manager. I don't know whether you can hire engineers in batches. I suspect it's probably not a good way to go. And no matter what, Jim, yes, recognized. Yeah, can I try it on your head, Jim? See, I'm sure it would sound nice and ripe and ready to go. Mine actually is very smooth and yeah. So yeah, hire people carefully, slowly. Once you get over about 3 salespeople, you must have a CRM tool. I don't care what it is. I prefer Salesforce, but you need to have a repository of information, a pipeline of leads and opportunities. So make sure that you invest in a good CRM tool. They're not very expensive. You buy them by the license, and it's all obviously in the cloud. Take the examples of your best people and spread them around, and I talk a little bit in a minute about how important I think coaching is. This says 12-point plan. I cut off 4 of my points, but I forgot to change it on this slide. If you've never been around salespeople before, you're in for a little bit of a shock. We're a different breed. We're nice people. Don't get too close when we're eating. Keep your hands and feet away from our mouth. But we're coin-operated, meaning that we go where the money is. If you tell us this is how your comp plan is structured, we may behave in unusual ways. Just remember that you have to sell stuff. Your company needs revenue, so you kind of need to put up with some loud. I mean, especially if you're not an American, think of an American, but times 10. That's what a salesperson is, right? And we're not quiet, we're loud, we're brash, and we make a lot of noise, and we sometimes break things. But when you need to clean up the glass of a salesperson that they've broken by promising something that doesn't exist, it gives you an opportunity to build some credibility with the customer. Don't create complicated comp plans. If you can't use just a regular calculator on your cell phone to figure out what you're making, just tell them you're going to make a straight commission. Don't do all this crazy stuff. Just say, listen, our product is about X amount of dollars, $10,000 per charging station, for example, you're going to make a straight 8%. You'll make $800 on every station that you sell, something along those lines. Very, very simple. You can get really complicated later on, but get yourself to 100 million in revenue before you do that. Number 6, agile methodologies, something that's very important in engineering. You iterate, you debug, you come up with the next rev. Sales methodologies work the same way. Iterate your process, never stay complacent, and always move forward. And then finally, 7 and 8, we talked about this already. Salespeople will sometimes act in rational but sometimes surprising ways. And I believe personally that from a coaching perspective, you need to actually take the best people and have them train or spread that knowledge. It's almost a tribal thing. Spread the tribal knowledge of the most successful reps and try and replicate that to the least successful reps. My dad has built a thriving executive coaching business doing exactly this, of coaching people, trying to take whatever has been successful and spread that around. I do think that's extremely important in sales. And then consistently communicate that to them. Make sure that they understand that their individual success means the company's success. And I want to make sure that this is real clear here. Anytime that a salesperson's behavior is in direct opposition to the company's best interests, your sales comp plan is screwed up. And let me give you an example of that. Let's say you decide we can't afford to have a sales rep blow their number out because we can't pay them a $50,000 commission check. But if you are paying them a $50,000 commission check, it better mean that they brought in $500,000 of revenue to the company, right? And maybe that was unexpected because you only thought they were going to bring in 200 maybe or 250, and they doubled it. So do you really have a problem with paying them a portion of what they earned? If you do, then keep in mind that they may behave in what seems like an irrational way. In other words, I'll give you an example here. If you cap their comp plan and say after a certain point you stop earning commission, I've seen this in companies, I've had this happen to me. What will happen is this, at the end of the quarter, let's say that, I'll give you just one illustration here. When I was starting out at a little company called CyberSource, and I was selling their online merchant packages and store shopping cart technology, they said to me that once you hit 120% of your quota for a quarter, you'll cease earning commission after that. I hit 120% of my quota before the end of the second month of the quarter. So I still had 5 weeks left to go, and I knew that anything that I brought in, any orders that I brought in, I would earn a big fat goose egg on. Now this put me in a moral conundrum, right? What the company wants me to do is keep booking orders, but they're not going to pay me anything for it. So when I kept getting orders, what's the human nature say? Just put it in the drawer. I'm going to wait until July 1st to book this one, because that's when the quarter ended, June 30th. Anything I put in now, I'm not going to make anything for. Now, does the company want? No, they desperately needed that revenue. Now, what did I do? I booked the orders. But I booked them by putting a Post-it note on each one saying, Mike earns 0 again. This isn't fair. Now, if I found out, or they found out that I was putting deals in the drawer and not booking them, which was in direct violation to what the company wanted me to do, they would certainly have had grounds to fire me. I didn't choose to do that, though. I chose to book the orders begrudgingly, but knew all along that this had to change. And the following fiscal year, they changed it, so there was no cap on that anymore. So keep in mind that when you tell somebody that their individual success means that it's also coincident with the company's success, mean it. And have the comp plan reflect it. Because if it doesn't, then you might have somebody faced with this moral conundrum or quandary that I was faced with, and who knows that everyone is automatically going to make that correct decision, okay? I know I'm sort of racing along, but I want to leave a lot of time for questions if you have them. I want to close with a thought about sort of measuring the effect of these tactics at ChargePoint. How has this worked at ChargePoint? Has it been effective? Well, we are dominating the market that we're in. Dominating it. We have 70+% of the market. And when I found that out, I started to ask the question, which is, does that count as domination? Are we dominating a market? And I looked for other examples of dominance. So let me show you some examples of dominance. Okay? Who's this? Usain Bolt. What is he doing? He's dominating, he's winning, he's skipping. He's in the Olympic 100-meter finals against the fastest men in the world. By the way, I think it's a little racist that they don't let white people in this race, because I don't see a single... I'm built for speed, and I could qualify, I think. He's up against people that can run 100 meters in less than 9.8 seconds, and he's so far ahead of them that he's skipping. That's domination. Who's this? How do you know that? You can't see his face. You see Beijing 2008, and he's about 10 meters ahead of everybody else. He's dominating. That's an example of domination. Does anybody know what this is a picture of? Has anybody ever seen this picture before? Secretariat in the 1973 Belmont. He had already dominated Kentucky Derby. He had dominated the Preakness. He was so dominant that only 3 or 4 other horses even bothered to enter the Belmont Stakes. And he won that race against the best horses in the world by 31 lengths. I don't give a shit about horse racing, but I love dominance. You look at what that jockey's doing in this picture. He's doing something that they tell jockeys on the first day of jockey school, after they say, don't eat anymore ever. The second thing they say is something else to never ever do. Look backwards. He's so far ahead that he's turning around wondering, why don't I hear any hoofs pounding? Where is everybody? Interesting story. When Secretariat died after a successful stud career, which is what I want to do when I retire from sales. Do they do that for? I could create good sales babies. After a successful stud career, they cut Secretariat open and they found out that his heart was 2.5 times larger than the average racehorse's heart. And that must have had something to do with why he was so dominant. All right, I've gotten off track. You want me to bring it home? I'll bring it home. Market dominance. What does it mean to dominate a market? For EV charging, like I said, ChargePoint owns this marketplace. We have 70+% of the marketplace, and our next 2 competitors, which are GE and SemiConnect, combined have 20% of the market. Let's look at it this way. If we have 70% of the market, even if this was a duopoly with only one other player, the most that they could have is 30. So the tactics that I'm showing you now, this is how we got to 70% market share. And that made me wonder, what about the other companies out there that appear to dominate? What do they have in their market? So you guys did okay on the target 22 minutes thing. Let me try again here. For digital music, downloads, and this is, I'm sorry, just for the United States. I hate to be US-centric, but I am born and bred there. In digital music, iTunes obviously is the #1. Dominant leader. What would you say they have as a share of their marketplace for digital music downloads, buying music online? 80%? Anyone say higher? 85? I mean, when I looked at this, when I started looking into it to see how does ChargePoint stack up, I thought they must have 90%, right? 50%. 50%. Okay. Amazon is #2, and Walmart is #3. Apple has 69% of that market, just over 2/3. And Amazon has 13 and Walmart has 12. That really surprised me when I saw that. But what it tells me is If you get to anything over 2/3 of a market, you're dominating that market. I know that probably seems intuitive and empirical to anybody else, but I'm a slow learner. It takes me a while to gather stuff. Let's try this again. Market dominance for internet search. Who dominates that market? Google? Does anybody want to guess anything else? Bing? Who would you say number 2 is? The correct answer is, who gives a shit? Do you want to be second place in that market? I don't know that you do. Maybe you do, right? My dad gave a great talk with Karen Tucker just before lunch about who's going to blow Google up. Who's going to have the disruptive technology to take down the market leader in any given space? And I would encourage you to think about that. Look at a market leader, somebody who is dominating a particular space, and figure out, how do I short circuit or plant a bomb underneath their dominance? Okay? You're absolutely right. Google is number 1. Does anybody want to guess what percent of the US search market Google has? Bing is number 2. Yahoo is number 3. Sorry, say again, I heard 90? Pranav, you said 50. Would you think 50 here or more? 70%? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? They have 2/3 of the market. So when you stack these up, and again, I'm certainly not trying to compare sort of ChargePoint and the tactics that we use to some of these titans of industry. I hope that we get there someday. Again, for my kids' college fund's sake, I certainly hope that we do. But if you get to 2/3 or more of a market, and if you can be there first, you're going to dominate. But remember that for the first several years, in the mid-90s when search came out, when it was Netscape and Yahoo, where was Google to be found? They were founded in, Dave, you worked there, 98? 97. Dave worked there starting in 2002. He saw, the early days of that IPO and whatnot, and Google ascended past Yahoo and past Netscape and all these other companies. Oh, sorry, Netscape was obviously a browser company, not a search company, but Netscape got usurped certainly by the other browsers in the space when they appeared to have a dominating position in what they were doing. Okay, so my feeling is that you need to look at what the other companies that dominate a particular space are and go short circuit that, plant a bomb underneath it. Or if you want to find a space that nobody else is in, that's great too. ChargePoint was attacking a space that didn't exist 10 years ago. The EV charging space in the electric vehicle market didn't exist 10 years ago. Although, interestingly enough, when I started looking at ChargePoint, and the only way that I found out about it was my dad was actually on their board, and I was between companies, and I needed my next challenge or project, and he said, I've got this little company I'm on the board of. It's about 9 people. It's called Coulomb Technologies. And I said, really, what do they do? I know you're on a lot of boards, but what does this one do? And he said, EV charging. And I said, what does EV stand for? And he said, electric vehicles. And I said, there aren't any electric vehicles. This was in the summer of 2008. And he said, I know there aren't now, but there will be. And companies are really moving toward that. So I started doing some research, and I found out that we had tried electric vehicles in the past. We tried it in the 90s, the 1890s. Back in the 1890s, there were 3 kinds of cars that you could get. One was steam, one was diesel, and one was electric. And back then, the horseless carriage was the plaything of the very rich. It was like owning a jet today. Back then, everyone was hand-built, custom-made. There were no big 3 automakers. There was no mass production. Who was the guy that came up with that? Henry Ford. And that wasn't until 1913, 1914. So back in the 1890s, these were the choices, those 3 options. And do you know what the market dominator was? Electric. Do you know what percentage of the market they had? Come on, you guys are quick. 70%. 70% of every horseless carriage that was built, 70% of all horseless carriages that were built in the 1890s were electric. Why? Because they were quiet, they were easy to start with a push button, And when you're wearing a giant crinoline hoop skirt and carrying a parasol, you don't want to hand crank a car or light a boiler to get the steam going, right? So, but why did we go away from it? We were in that market. They were dominant. Why did it go away? Politics. I think he's absolutely right. That's a good point, Demetrius. The politics did a couple things. One, when Henry Ford developed his mass production, any color you wanted, as long as it was black, and any engine you wanted, as long as it was diesel. Henry Ford didn't make electric vehicles or steam-powered vehicles. He made one choice, a car for every man. And it was amazingly popular and cheap, and it was crazy, and it changed the world for anybody who wanted to build vehicles, period. Electric vehicles went the way of the dodo. And they didn't resurface until the 1990s, 100 years later. So we've been on a 100-year addiction to fossil fuels, which we're now starting to get out of. So one of the things that I always like to talk about, and this is actually, I've already sort of passed my last slide, and we got plenty of time left, so I'll just quickly go over a couple things here. Electric vehicles themselves are something that I think we should have gotten into a long time ago. We did try them. They were successful for a while. Then they went away. Now they're coming back. Why are they coming back? Well, the rise of the hybrid in 2001, the Toyota Prius, the Honda Insight, those things, those disruptive technologies happen in the automotive world about once a generation. And when that happens, the same two things happen every time. The first thing is what's called the forced follow. Since it's so successful, every company is forced to follow and do the exact same type of thing or get left behind. And then the second thing is they all look and try and iterate and see what is the next sort of development or progression organically in this marketplace. So when hybrids caught the entire automotive industry off guard in 2001, every car company in the world immediately rushed to come out with their own hybrid something or other. So now today, if you say, let's play word association, I say hybrid, you say, everyone will say Prius. But if you say, but even though that's the case, every car company in the world has a hybrid something. There's 45 models of hybrid vehicle out there. There's a hybrid Honda Civic. There's a hybrid Lexus LX 400. There's even a hybrid Chevy Tahoe that instead of getting 12 miles to a gallon, gets 15. But you get to say you're driving a hybrid. It's got a little green leaf on the back, and you feel great about yourself. So examples of that happening in history, I said it happens about once every generation, and the same two events happen. It happened in the early 90s with the first SUV. It happened in the early 80s with the first minivan. It happened in the early 50s with the first sports car, the Chevy Corvette. Within a couple of years, you had the Mustang and the Camaro and the T-Bird and everything else because it becomes a watershed or disruptive niche in the automotive industry that grows to become something massive. That's what we're seeing right now. So I always tell my kids that we're incredibly lucky to have been born when we were born. So that's why I title my talk Selling in the Digital Age. 500 years from now, in this room or a room like it, but I'm guaranteeing you Oxford will still exist, they'll be talking about how much things have changed and how much things started to change in the late 20th century and moving forward. Some people might call it the internet age. Some people might call it the age of information. Some people might call it the digital age. That's what I'm referring to it as. But make no mistake, the time that we're living in now is just as much of a watershed epic in human history as the Renaissance, the age of thought, the Industrial Revolution. We're in one of those times right now, and there's no Black Plague, cholera, or diphtheria, or any of those types of things. That's my only healthcare plug. That's all I know about healthcare. So I think we're incredibly lucky. And what I always like to say is that in any time that you live, which you don't get to choose, there's also places that you would like to live that you also don't get to choose. Well, you can choose where you move, but you can't choose where you were born. You can choose where you go, though. I always tell my kids this, and they're bored to death. And I talked about, Kelly reminding me about the Cisco horror story. And one of the things that I love about her the most is we've been together for a long time, and she's heard every one of these stories that I'm telling you, and every story that I put up there at least six times each, and still doesn't appear to be bored. So she reminded me to tell you about this, and I want to add that when it comes to these eras that I'm talking about, for every interesting time in human history, there's a really cool place that you could live. And the examples that I give are these. If you could have lived in 2200 BC, would you have wanted to live right here? Or Silicon Valley? There wasn't a London or a Silicon Valley then. If I could have been alive then, I would have loved to have lived on the Giza Plateau in Egypt and seen those gorgeous pyramids being constructed. As long as you weren't one of the conscripts that were required to build them, it would be amazing to live in that time. If you could have lived in 800 BC, where would you want to live? I would pick Athens, Greece, and seen Socrates and Aristotle and Plato teach in person. What about 30 AD? Where would you want to live? Rome, maybe Jerusalem. I don't care if you're a Christian or not. I don't care if you're a Roman or not. To be able to see the Caesars at the height of their power, or to be able to see Jesus Christ teach, would be a watershed experience in your lifetime. If I could have lived in 630 AD, I would have wanted to live in Medina, Iraq, and seen Muhammad teach in person. And I'm not Islamic, but I still would have wanted to see one of the world's great teachers create something out of whole cloth. And one of the things that I always like to say is there's only been three things in human history that have gathered 1 billion followers: Christianity, Islam, and Facebook. Those are the only three things. And I say it as a joke. Demetrius, good luck in your interview. I hope you get it. 1 billion people in each one of those three things, except Christianity was founded in 30 AD, Islam was founded in the 7th century, and Facebook was founded in 2005. It's funny, but it also helps to illustrate how fast technology is moving right now, and that's why I think we are so lucky to live in this time, because our world is going to change more in the next 25 years than it changed in the previous 1,000 years. And we're all going to live to see it, or at least I will if I get my cholesterol down. So with that, I would like to close and ask any questions. Thank you very much for your attention, by the way, and I really appreciate your attendance. I know that VJ, my best buddy in the world, has the microphone if anybody has any questions about anything that we've talked about, selling or otherwise. We got one right here.
So you said don't make your sales hire one of the first 5 people you hire in the company. My question was, shouldn't everybody in a new company be able to sell?
It's a great question. If you didn't hear it, he said, shouldn't everybody in the company be able to sell? Yes, but they can't. I will freely admit that I have 0 marketable skills whatsoever. My ex-wife told me that. She said, I think you should go into sales because I don't think you can do anything else. And she was right. I don't think I do have any other marketable skills, but being able to talk to somebody and establish a connection or a rapport with them, and then be able to get them to give you a lot of money based on the rapport that you build with them, that is a skill that not very many people have. So I've never seen a brilliant, genius-level software developer also have the ability to go out and sell that way. So I think they're very different skill sets, and you need to hire for it. I've got a question over here.
I have a follow-up to that. I recently read Daniel Pink's
To Sell is Human, great book.
And he would certainly agree with you in terms of that first quality of empathy, but he had a couple other points. One is that the nature of sales has fundamentally changed because there used to be asymmetrical information, and now the consumer or the purchaser has an equal footing, so therefore the empathy is much more important. Second, the other point is everyone is in sales because everyone job has changed, whether you're an academic.
We all
or
do
not.
sell every day. It's a great point.
But one of the things that was sort of interesting is they talked about Palantir, a big data company that's in the security area, and how they didn't hire salespeople. They basically took engineers, they gave them some empathy training, some improv training, and they put them out in the workforce. And they thought that was a better model. And I'm kind of curious whether you think that's true for a highly technical
We'll see
product.
how that goes. I do think, in fact, if you could, VJ, if you could hand the microphone to my dad, I'd like him to share an anecdote based on him selling at DEC in the 70s and how their founder, Ken Olson, who was an engineer to the core, believed that good products didn't need salespeople, so he refused to give their sales force commission. And how did that work, Pop?
Well, I mean, Ken Olson, I genuflect when you say his name. To me, he was the Henry Ford of computing. He was a genius in many, many ways, entrepreneur of the century in some ways. But he did not understand, let alone respect sales. And I joined the company in January 1972 when the product lines consisted of the newly launched PDP-11 and the PDP-8 and so on. And DEC at the time was about an $80 million company. And I went to my first sales meeting at the district manager's office or house in Pittsburgh. All eight of us were there from the whole Ohio Valley area. And Ken Olson was the guest of honor, the CEO and founder of the company. He comes in, and I'll never forget it. I have it to this day written in a spiral notebook, which I keep notes in. And he wrote, "We figure a digital. If you get the product right, the sales force is irrelevant." And I thought, what am I doing here? And what I watched, that company was built from 1957 through the early 70s on the backs of brilliant engineering and brilliant engineers. And I was a real, which of these things is not like the other. When I got hired in that company, I fought my way in. I mean, literally, through the front door, the side door, over the top. I wanted to get in, but I had to fight every level of sales management, which it's laughable that they were called sales management, to get a job there. I didn't know how to configure an analog to digital interface. I didn't know the difference between analog and digital. I did know, however, that a client at BF Goodrich needed to figure out how to automate the collection of data on tire uniformity grading, and that's all he needed to do was get that problem solved, and I got it solved for him. And I became the new model of sales there. And with all due respect to engineers, I have a degree in engineering, and my father was an engineer, but I've never been paid to be an engineer. I'm not one. I agree with Michael. I think the skill sets, they're not mutually exclusive. And I would say I know some exceptional people that can do both. John Hennessy, for instance, the president of Stanford, no offense to Oxford, but John Hennessy is a genius computer scientist and designer, created the RISC technology and so on, the MIPS chip. Anybody that's president of a university of the stature of Stanford knows how to sell. So he's extraordinary. Steve Jobs, in my opinion, was a substandard human being, but a genius marketing and design person. So he had, this odd mix of skills. But I think in general, salespeople and engineers are wired differently. And I think for engineers, there's a right answer, and they work to find it. They're like scientists. There's one truth, and they're in search of it. Salespeople, not that we disrespect the truth, don't get me wrong. But the salesperson, it's the relationship trumps everything. The master salespeople. There's people that can go out and make numbers for you, but if they burn enough of your clients, you probably won't get them back and whatnot. And that guy will be gone to the next fast-talking slickster outfit in town.
And to build on that point, I did say that the number one quality you have to have is empathy, but remember I said that's not the only quality you have to have.
Right.
I knew a young gal who worked for me about a year and a half ago who was one of the most empathetic people I've ever met. She was also the worst salesperson I ever had. She had zero ability to question, probe. We follow in sales what's called the PO line. It's like a treasure map from first contact to contract. And the most direct line that you can follow is the best one. Sometimes that line takes 2 years. Well, this young gal, God love her, was absolutely horrible at being able to stay on that PO line. She got lost almost instantaneously. And I eventually had to fire her, which I felt terrible about, but I recently found out that she found a new career working with autistic children, which she loves and is much more suited to her temperament and mean. So having empathy and teaching somebody how to be empathetic, which I'm not sure if you can teach somebody to be empathetic, but if you can, I think it's probably easier to teach somebody selling tactics and questioning techniques and listening techniques than teaching somebody to be empathetic. A lot of times I've said that most of what you learned, most of what makes you successful about sales or makes you successful in sales, most of that you have learned before you're out of diapers. So a lot of it actually comes from the environment that you were raised in. But it is a good question, I'll be interested to see how a company like that who doesn't hire an actual sales force, whether they're going to be successful or not. And I guess the final coda that I would add is that it is highly dependent on what type of business you're in. If you're in, say, the telco business and there's 5 possible customers in the world that you can sell to, or if you're Boeing or Airbus, and that is a true duopoly, with all due respect to the new Chinese airline company that the Chinese government's trying to build to crack into that duopoly of Airbus and Boeing. You can't put an empathetic person in charge of selling $7 billion worth of airplanes to Dubai. That person has to have 30 or 40 years worth of negotiation expertise, or they're going to get eaten alive. So I do think that there is a skill set that you have to hire. Other questions? Any other questions that we have? I think that's it. We'll get you out about oh, no, sorry, we do have a question over here. You ruined it, Pranav. I was about ready to dismiss everybody.
Hi. It was a very good talk and inspiring talk. I would just like to know about the future of the car. Do you think the diesel and the petrol cars will be completely replaced by the electric vehicles, especially in the developing countries considering the shortage of electricity?
I think it's a good question, and we don't know where things are going to go. What I think is that in the next 50 years, I don't know what the winning technology is going to be, but I know what the losing technology is going to be. And that is fossil fuel-based petrol, gasoline, anything that comes from crude oil, because that is not a renewable resource. So I don't know if electrics will win, or CNG, or hydrogen-powered, or seaweed-based, or methane fuel. I don't know what it's going to be. I just know what it's not going to be. And the other thing that I would add is, if you could go back in time, we sort of, thought about 30 AD. If I could go back to 1776, grab George Washington and pull him into a pub for a flagon of ale, and if I could convince him that I was from today, if he didn't think I was insane, because I didn't have a powdered wig, but I could probably borrow one, and he believed that I was really from the year 2013, and I said to him, George, great job on the country, by the way. You've created or helped to create the greatest economic power the world has ever known, although we're now on the decline. We're now a second-rate power. China and India are nipping at our heels. We're no longer a manufacturing country, but for a long time there, we were the biggest gorilla on the block. And here's what life is like in 2013 in the United States or around the world. And if you could tell him that every single person has a horseless carriage, self-propelled, no team of horses, and he said, how is that car powered? The sun? Steam? Coal. How is it powered? If you could convince him that there was such a thing called dinosaurs that lived 80 million years ago, that where they laid down and died, we drilled, pulled this black goopy stuff out of the ground, refined it, which was very harmful to the environment, and that's what we put in our cars to power them, he would say, you are insane, with or without a white wig. There is no, why would you have chosen that? Is that going to renew itself? I don't know when crude oil is going to run out, and believe me, I'm not an environmentalist. I'm a capitalist. But I drive an electric car now, and I'll never switch back. What I'm saying, and even my dad, who's driven tons of high-powered cars, he's a car enthusiast, and he's not giving up his Ferrari, I can tell you that. But his everyday driver is a plug-in Chevy Volt, and he loves that car. My feeling is I don't care whether you love them or hate them, because we have relatives of ours from Pittsburgh and Cleveland who say, yeah, you lefty, commie, hippie, pinko Californians drive your electric cars. That's fine. I'm going to stick with my Ford F-150 gas-guzzling pickup truck. That's fine. Do you think, though, that oil will never run out? There will come a day when we pull the last barrel of oil out of the crust of this earth. And when that day comes, I don't care whether it's 50 years from now or 250 years from now, we better have a plan B. And I don't care if it's nuclear powered or compressed natural gas or shale gas or electric or a combination of all of them, but we're not going to have a choice to power our vehicles based on crude oil or fossil fuels anymore. And that is happening faster than we can imagine. So when I talked about the revolution of information and internet and all that stuff, fortunately, we're right in the midst of another revolution. 100 years from now, your grandchildren or great-grandchildren will say, wow, I can't believe you guys were ever dumb enough to drive gas-powered cars. But right around 2010, 2015, that's when it all started to change. I think maybe we'll do one more question. The last name is spelled Billmaier, Bill Meyer.
The book came out in 2011, and it was brilliantly edited. Even though the author is an environmentalist, he aimed the book at people who watch Fox News. If you don't know what that means, these are people who are climate change deniers, who believe, Al Gore's fake scientist. And the book is full of reasons why anybody with a 2-digit IQ should buy a car with plug. Whether it's performance, convenience, safety, economy, national security, it's a really, really cool.
All right, Vijay, will you give the microphone? Oh, we've got one here, and then the gentleman up here in the plaid shirt. And while you're asking your question, I'll just mention real quickly that please connect with me on LinkedIn, or I'm going to leave a stack of my business cards here. If there's anything I can ever do to help you, whether it's in Silicon Valley or here, I'm happy to try. Yeah, question.
Thanks. It's a quick question. In your point of view, how will big data change the sales behavior?
I'm not sure I caught the whole question.
How will the trend of big data change the sales behavior?
Big data?
Yeah.
Well, I think Salesforce and some of these other CRM tools, just the proliferation of data out there has made sales a lot easier. So for example, there are tools that you can use now, big data tools, that will tell you when you send out an email blast as a marketing tool to all of your prospects in your system, it will not only tell you who's opened that email, but who clicked on a link inside it, how long they spent inside it, what they did once they went to the landing page, and all those different kinds of things. There's companies called Marketo and other companies that will do these kinds of things. Those types of, I would consider that big data, although last year's whole SVCO, Jim, was about big data, right? And part of the sort of conundrum was we weren't really sure what big data, how do you define it? So I think it's sort of one of those things where it is what you think it is. It's kind of like beauty. It's whatever you perceive it to be. So as I perceive big data, I would say that it's going to make sales a lot easier. Although keep in mind, the counterpoint to that, the obverse of that, is that all of that data is also available to your customer, which means that the premium that's placed on honesty and empathy goes up. Because if you're dishonest or in any way try and be cunning or trick them, they're going to find out. They might not find out before they buy from you, but they will find out eventually. And I always like to say that the hardest sale to ever make to a customer is not the first sale, it's the second sale. It's like if you were to own a restaurant. It's not hard to get somebody to come in and try your restaurant once, but you have to be good to get them to come back again and again. So I think big data is going to make things easier for the sales team to do everything that they need to do, but it also provides a lot of information to the customer and makes that readily available to them. Please, yeah, we'll do. Here's the last question, and then welcome to Jim.
Thanks, Mike. to what extent do you think a really good salesperson can translate across industries? So could you go and sell electric cars, for example?
I don't know that I would want to take the pay cut, but I think I could probably do it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I was talking to Gary Lauer last night, and this is, he's been here a couple years longer than I have coming to SVCO. He said he loves doing it, but the term masterclass feels presumptuous to him because he doesn't feel like a master, even though he's been a CEO for 15 years. So I don't know if I'm a master salesperson. But what I can tell you is if you consider me to be above average in the area of sales, and you look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that every single company that I've worked for, whether it's SGI, CyberSource, VeriSign, NetApp, Exactly, and now ChargePoint, the only common thread is that there's nothing in common. Not one of those companies does anything like any of the others. One sold visual workstations and servers. One sold storage. One sold professional services. Another sold cloud software and now charging stations. So my belief is that the tools and skills that you have that make you successful at sales, the product becomes irrelevant. Because I can go on a sales call now with somebody from my previous Rolodex and say, listen, how are things going? How's Martha and the kids? We need to chat. And then by the time the dinner's over, we haven't talked yet about what the product is. They're not buying the product, they're really buying me, right? So it doesn't, to me, I don't really believe that it matters. My dad told me a long time ago a story about a guy, kind of a Machiavellian prick who was taking over a company that he was working for who had him pigeonholed as a hardware guy. And we're a software company. You're not a software guy. That's crap. If you can sell Lady Kenmore washers, John Deere riding mowers, software as a service, professional services, I don't care what it is. There's a spectrum, and I think the tools that you use, the things that I've shown you here in my workshop yesterday, I think are universal. This is not just about charging stations. So thank you very much, folks. You made me feel very welcome. I really appreciate it. We're going to bring Jim down for just a moment.
I want to speak with you.
Oh, is that right? Are we going to sit down, Jim, or are you just...
No, we're going to stand up. So stand next to me if you don't mind,
Should I lay down?
Mike. So,
I feel like
I want to say...
psychoanalysis?
I think I'm speaking for the recording here, but I want to say, first of all, thank you. I asked Mike to come back this year for a specific reason. First of all, you should know salespeople come in all shapes and sizes.
That's rude.
So my first background, I would always say, is that I'm a salesperson. I started my career as a door-to-door salesperson. I used to call myself a professional porch climber because you'd walk up and knock on the doors.
Toughest sales gig there is.
That's the way I began. And so I want to give you first thing is that the reason I asked Mike to come back is that being an alumni of this program, the MBA program, is everybody MBA students in here, most of the MBA students? I felt like the curriculum was missing this component. And what I want you to know is the person that runs the Entrepreneurship Center activities here, I see 1,000 business plans a year. The most common thread of failure in those business plans is that they don't know how to build distribution and sales. And so I wanted to make sure Mike would come back and share it because I think it's the vital component of success that's missing in most of the startup plans that we see come through the university here so far. It's very, very important. And if it's okay, I'm going to share just one of my stories about why this is important and why I value the time, and I'm thankful that you came and shared it. And I think everything you shared is spot on. I just really want you to know that I came in to sit because I was like, he needs to be here, and I really appreciate you coming. So after working for a company, I worked for one company from 17 to 27, selling, just basic selling, cold calling, making the calls, learning those skill sets to sell. But I had saved enough money to start my own company and thought, I'll do it, I'll be an entrepreneur. So when I had all the money that I had saved, which I don't need to go into the amounts, it was a decent amount of money. I started this little company. I thought, well, you got to hire a sales team. You got to get them out there, pay them, and get them going. Well, in about 12 months, I lost 80% of my lifetime assets. They were gone in the startup. In fact, most people were asking me to go see a psychologist. They thought I was nuts. And what I did from there is I let all the salespeople go, tried to cut off the bleeding, and said, if it's going to be sold, I'm just going to start with me. want to make sure that this works and then you can get it going. We scaled the business from that 5 years later to a $100 million company and sold it in 2005. It starts with sales. You have to be able to distribute a product. You don't have new ideas, at least most people don't. You may have a new way to present it, a new way to piece it together, a new way to distribute it. You may have something there that's new, but other people are thinking about it. If you're going to be dominant, and I love the slides about dominance, you have to understand these skill sets. And I don't think we teach them here. So one of the things I want you to know is that I don't think MBA programs give you this. So the purpose of the master class is to give you the opportunity to sit with a master, and you may not consider yourself a master, but I think the skill sets are here. These are skill sets that you need to master. So please do stay in touch. I think Mike and his father, Joe, and his brother are always willing to help us. We're thankful to them for the help that they give us, and I would tell you that as students, you have resources around you, and this is a vital part if you're interested in the growth of businesses and entrepreneurship type activities.
And to add to that, last year was my first year at SVCO, and I've lost track of how many of the students from last year that came to my masterclass have stayed in touch with me, have asked me for help, have asked me, how would you handle this situation, or I'm about to try and sell my business plan to a VC. If any of you have not seen Reid Hoffman's 7 Myths about selling your business plan to a VC, I in fact intended to include that as part of my masterclass. I took it out actually at the last minute before I boarded the plane to come here. But please go, it's on his personal website. You search for Reid Hoffman 7 Myths. If you're trying to sell a business plan to a VC, by all means, some of this stuff I think would probably be old hat for some of the entrepreneurs here. I'd be happy to go with it. I actually have a copy of it printed in my bag back here, and I'd be happy to show you what those myths are. We probably don't have enough time to do it now, but I really appreciate the kind words that you say, Jim. You overwhelm me. Very flattering, and I really am honored to be a part of this. It's a very august group, and I know that I could probably never get into Oxford, but being able to lecture here is the next best thing. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. It's a real honor. I really appreciate it.